Imagine lying completely still, with no danger nearby, no hunger pressing, and nothing you are required to do. In the natural world, this moment would signal safety, recovery, and restored strength. For most of human evolution, being able to stop meant that survival, at least for now, had been secured. And yet, many modern humans experience the opposite. The body feels heavy, the mind dull, and exhaustion deepens precisely when nothing is demanded. This is not a failure of discipline, and not a lack of effort. It may be the cost of carrying an ancient nervous system into a world it was never shaped to interpret. So what exactly is the body doing when it feels tired even while resting? For most of human history, rest did not happen in places designed for comfort or calm. It happened on uneven ground, in shifting temperatures, under open skies, or inside fragile shelters that offered only partial protection. Rest meant stopping movement, but it did not mean safety in the way we understand it today. Early humans rested with their senses still open, listening for sounds, feeling changes in wind, watching shadows, and staying ready to move again at any moment. The body learned that stopping was temporary, and that stillness carried its own risks. In such conditions, the nervous system did not switch off. It stayed alert, conserving energy while remaining prepared for sudden action. This pattern shaped the way rest was encoded in the human body long before beds, walls, or silence existed. When food was scarce and danger unpredictable, deep relaxation could be costly. A body that relaxed too fully might fail to react in time. Over many generations, survival favored those whose rest remained light, fragmented, and cautious. The result was a body that learned to pause without fully letting go. Even during periods of relative safety, rest was layered with tension, because safety itself was never guaranteed for long. This evolutionary memory still lives inside modern humans. When a person lies down today in a quiet room, the environment may signal comfort, but the body does not automatically recognize it as a condition for deep restoration. The ancient system that regulates energy and vigilance does not respond to furniture, darkness, or silence alone. It responds to patterns that once predicted survival: movement followed by stillness, effort followed by recovery, danger followed by escape. When rest occurs without those familiar sequences, the body may remain uncertain about what is expected next. Instead of releasing energy, it holds it in reserve. This holding is not always felt as alertness. Often it feels like heaviness, dullness, or fatigue without relief. The body is working quietly, maintaining readiness without resolution. Over time, this unresolved state can feel more tiring than activity itself. Especially in later life, when the body has accumulated decades of such patterns, the contrast becomes more noticeable. Many older adults report that sitting or lying down does not bring the refreshment they remember from earlier years. This is not simply aging, and not simply illness. It reflects a system shaped in a world where rest was never an end state, only a pause. Modern rest removes physical threats, but does not always provide the signals that the body evolved to trust. Without those signals, the nervous system stays partially engaged, even when nothing is required. The mind may believe it is resting, but the body is still waiting. This quiet waiting consumes energy in small amounts over long periods, creating a sense of tiredness that does not resolve with stillness alone. The feeling can be confusing, especially when life appears calm and demands are low. Yet the body is responding according to rules written long before comfort became normal. Understanding this does not immediately remove fatigue, but it reframes it. It suggests that feeling tired while resting is not a personal failure, but a mismatch between ancient expectations and modern conditions. The question that remains is whether a body shaped by constant uncertainty can ever fully learn to rest in a world that promises safety without proving it. Rest in early human life was closely tied to the landscape itself. The ground was rarely flat, temperatures shifted through the night, and sounds never fully disappeared. Even when a group stopped moving, the environment continued to demand attention. Wind carried unfamiliar scents, animals moved nearby, and darkness reduced visibility rather than providing calm. Under these conditions, the body learned that rest was a change in posture, not a change in responsibility. Muscles might loosen slightly, but perception remained active. The brain continued to sample the environment, comparing present signals with past danger. This constant monitoring required energy, even in stillness. Over time, this shaped a form of rest that was shallow but adaptive. Deep relaxation was not advantageous when unpredictability was the rule. A body that rested too deeply risked missing the first signs of threat. As a result, human rest evolved to be light enough to allow quick awakening and rapid movement. This pattern was reinforced every night, across thousands of generations. Rest was a survival strategy, not a recovery ritual. It reduced movement, but preserved readiness. When danger passed without incident, the body did not receive a clear signal to release tension. It simply continued until movement resumed. In modern settings, many of the external dangers are gone, but the internal rules remain. The nervous system does not distinguish between a quiet forest edge and a silent bedroom. Silence alone does not equal safety in evolutionary terms. What once mattered were sequences: effort followed by refuge, threat followed by distance, exhaustion followed by proven protection. Without those sequences, the body remains uncertain. This uncertainty is subtle, but persistent. It appears as restlessness, shallow breathing, or a vague sense of fatigue that does not lift. Older adults often feel this more clearly because their bodies have repeated this pattern for longer. Decades of light rest accumulate as a baseline state. When activity decreases with age, the contrast becomes sharper. There is more time spent resting, but not more time spent recovering. The body expects rest to follow exertion, yet modern life often offers stillness without meaningful physical release. Sitting quietly does not complete the cycle the body recognizes. As a result, energy remains locked in reserve. This can feel like tiredness without relief, or heaviness without cause. Importantly, this sensation is not a sign that the body is failing. It is a sign that the body is behaving exactly as it was shaped to behave. Evolution favored continuity, not comfort. The systems that regulate rest were never redesigned for long-term safety or prolonged inactivity. They were tuned for short pauses in uncertain conditions. When those systems encounter modern rest, they do not relax into it, they hover. This hovering consumes small amounts of energy continuously. Over hours and days, that cost becomes noticeable. People may say they feel drained even though they have done very little. From the body's perspective, it has been working the entire time. It has been waiting, scanning, and maintaining readiness without resolution. Understanding this helps shift the question away from effort and toward alignment. The issue is not that rest is insufficient, but that rest no longer matches the body's expectations. Without acknowledging this mismatch, modern rest can paradoxically deepen fatigue rather than ease it. As human societies slowly changed, the conditions of rest changed with them. But the body did not. Shelters became more stable, fire offered warmth and light, and groups learned to reduce some immediate dangers. Yet even in these early forms of relative security, rest remained conditional. Fires could go out, shelters could fail, and threats could still arrive without warning. The body continued to treat rest as provisional. It never learned to interpret stillness as a final state. Instead, it learned to hover between action and release. This pattern carried forward as humans began to settle, farm, and store food. Physical threats decreased in some places, but new pressures emerged. Responsibility for land, resources, and social roles created a different kind of vigilance. Rest no longer occurred only in the presence of nature, but also within communities where awareness of others mattered. The body stayed engaged, monitoring not only the environment but also social signals. Approval, conflict, and obligation became part of survival. This added another layer of tension to rest. Even when the body stopped moving, the mind remained involved. Over generations, this reinforced the idea that rest was never fully private or fully safe. It was always shared with watchfulness. As time passed and living conditions improved further, the external need for vigilance continued to drop, but the internal mechanisms did not recalibrate. Evolution moves slowly, and it favors what worked before. The systems that kept humans alive for thousands of years were not replaced simply because walls became thicker or nights quieter. The body continued to operate under older assumptions. It still treated rest as a pause that required monitoring. In modern life, especially later in life, this creates a strange reversal. The environment finally offers sustained safety, but the body responds with uncertainty. Long periods of rest without interruption can feel unnatural. Instead of deepening recovery, extended stillness can amplify fatigue. The body remains suspended, waiting for a signal that never arrives. This waiting has a cost. Muscles remain slightly engaged, breathing stays shallow, and the nervous system maintains a low level of activity. None of this feels dramatic. It accumulates quietly. Over hours and days, the energy spent on maintaining readiness exceeds the energy restored by rest. The result is a sense of tiredness that seems disconnected from effort. Older adults often describe feeling worn down despite calm routines and limited demands. This experience is not random. It reflects a lifetime of a body trained to expect rest to end quickly. When it does not, the body does not know how to settle into it. Instead, it stays in a holding pattern. This holding pattern is not conscious. It cannot be resolved by intention alone. The mind may want to rest, but the body follows older rules. Understanding this helps remove self-blame. Feeling tired while resting does not mean something is wrong with motivation or discipline. It means the body is responding according to a history it cannot forget. The mismatch between ancient expectations and modern conditions becomes more visible as life slows down. When movement decreases and stillness increases, the unresolved nature of rest comes to the foreground. The body has not been taught that rest can now be complete. It has only learned that rest is temporary. Until that expectation changes, rest may continue to feel unfinished. This does not offer a solution yet. It only clarifies the origin of the problem. The question that follows is not how to rest more, but how the body decides when rest is truly allowed to end its vigilance. The human body was not designed to waste energy. For most of evolutionary history, energy was difficult to obtain and easy to lose. Every movement carried a cost, and every calorie mattered. Survival favored bodies that learned to conserve rather than expend. In this context, the sensation of tiredness served an important function. It was not only a response to exertion, but a protective signal that limited unnecessary activity. Feeling tired encouraged stillness when resources were uncertain. It slowed behavior and reduced risk. Over time, this system became deeply embedded. The body learned to err on the side of caution, preserving energy whenever the future was unclear. Rest, in this framework, was not meant to rapidly restore energy to a full state. It was meant to prevent further loss. This distinction is important. A body designed to conserve energy does not automatically interpret rest as permission to replenish freely. Instead, it maintains control, releasing energy slowly and selectively. In early human environments, this strategy worked. Food availability fluctuated, and long periods of abundance were rare. A body that restored too quickly risked spending that energy before it could be replaced. Tiredness acted as a brake. Even during periods of inactivity, it reminded the body to hold back. In modern life, this ancient logic remains active. When a person rests today, the body does not immediately assess comfort or leisure. It assesses uncertainty. It asks whether energy should be released or stored. In the absence of clear signals that resources are secure, the default response is restraint. This restraint is felt as lingering fatigue. The body is not failing to recover, it is choosing not to. Especially in older age, when energy production becomes less efficient, this conservation strategy becomes more pronounced. The body becomes even more careful about when and how energy is spent. Rest without clear purpose or completion can therefore feel draining rather than refreshing. The body remains in a guarded state, holding on to reserves. This holding requires effort at a biological level. Maintaining muscle tone, regulating temperature, and sustaining basic alertness all consume energy. When energy is not fully released for recovery, these background costs become more noticeable. The person feels tired even though they have not been active. From the body's perspective, it has been managing scarcity. This perspective does not change easily with age or environment. It was shaped by conditions where abundance was temporary and loss could be fatal. Modern rest does not automatically override this logic. Sitting or lying down does not prove to the body that energy can be safely restored. The body waits for confirmation that the future will not demand sudden expenditure. Without that confirmation, it stays cautious. This explains why rest can feel incomplete. The sensation of tiredness persists because the system that governs energy release has not been satisfied. It is not malfunctioning. It is following rules that once kept humans alive. Understanding this shifts the focus away from effort and toward design. The body is not lazy, and it is not broken. It is conservative by nature. The question that remains is how a system built for scarcity behaves in a world where scarcity is no longer immediate, but still remembered. Energy in the human body is not released all at once. It is regulated through layers of signals that developed under conditions where mistakes were costly. In early human life, a sudden need for action could arise without warning. A predator, a rival group, or a change in weather could demand immediate movement. Because of this, the body learned to keep part of its energy inaccessible, even during periods of rest. This reserve was not visible or conscious. It was held back through subtle mechanisms that controlled muscle tone, hormone release, and nervous system activity. Rest did not empty these reserves. It simply reduced outward movement while keeping internal readiness intact. Over time, this created a body that never fully relaxed unless certain conditions were met. Those conditions were not comfort or leisure. They were certainty and completion. When danger had clearly passed and resources were secure, the body could afford to release energy more freely. In most modern settings, that clarity is missing. The environment feels safe to the mind, but the body does not detect the same signals it evolved to trust. There is no clear end to demand, no physical marker that says the cycle is complete. As a result, energy remains partially locked away. This locked energy contributes to the feeling of tiredness during rest. The body is maintaining a state of readiness that no longer serves a clear purpose, yet it continues out of habit. In older age, this process becomes more noticeable. Energy production slows and reserves are smaller. The cost of holding energy back becomes more apparent because there is less available to begin with. Rest does not feel replenishing because the system is still regulating access rather than restoring freely. This can lead to a sense of constant low-level fatigue that persists regardless of activity. Importantly, this fatigue does not respond well to simple rest. Lying down longer does not change the underlying decision the body is making. The body is not responding to duration. It is responding to signals. Without signals that indicate safety across time, energy remains restricted. This explains why many people feel just as tired after hours of inactivity as they did before resting. The body has not been given permission to shift from conservation to recovery. From an evolutionary perspective, this restraint was sensible. Releasing energy too early could mean vulnerability later. In the past, the cost of a false sense of security was high. Modern life rarely presents such immediate risks, but the body still behaves as if it might. This behavior is not conscious and cannot be overridden by willpower. Telling oneself to relax does not change how energy is regulated at a biological level. The system responds to patterns, not intentions. Understanding this helps explain why rest can feel effortful. The body is doing quiet work, managing reserves, balancing risk, and maintaining readiness. This work consumes energy even in stillness. Over time, especially in later life, that consumption becomes felt as fatigue. The problem is not that the body is failing to rest, but that it is resting according to rules that no longer fit the environment. The question that follows is how these rules interact with the brain and nervous system, which play a central role in deciding when energy can finally be released. The regulation of energy does not occur in isolation within muscles or organs. It is closely linked to how the brain interprets the world. In human evolution, the brain became the central coordinator of survival, constantly evaluating whether the present moment was safe enough to allow release. This evaluation did not rely on comfort or calm, but on prediction. The brain learned to ask what might happen next. If the future was uncertain, energy was held back. This predictive role remains active even during rest. When a person lies down today, the brain does not simply register stillness. It continues to assess time, memory, and expectation. Thoughts drift to unfinished tasks, past difficulties, or vague anticipation of what comes later. None of these need to be intense to have an effect. Even quiet awareness keeps the brain engaged. This engagement has a biological cost. The brain consumes energy continuously, and its activity influences how much energy the rest of the body is allowed to use for recovery. When the brain remains in a predictive mode, energy stays regulated rather than released. The body rests on the surface, but internally it remains controlled. This is why mental quiet matters more than physical stillness for recovery. Yet mental quiet is harder to achieve. For most of human history, mental quiet followed physical exhaustion and environmental resolution. After a long hunt, migration, or successful defense, the future felt temporarily settled. In those moments, the brain could reduce prediction because the next step was clear. Modern rest often lacks this clarity. Physical effort may be low, but the sense of completion is missing. The brain continues to scan for what comes next, even when nothing urgent exists. In older age, this effect can intensify. A lifetime of experiences gives the brain a long memory of uncertainty. It has learned that life rarely offers permanent resolution. As activity slows with age, there are fewer physical signals that tell the brain a cycle has ended. The result is extended periods of low-level prediction. The brain remains active, subtly restricting energy release. The person feels tired, but not relieved by rest. This tiredness is not simply physical. It reflects the cost of ongoing evaluation. The brain is doing what it has always done, preparing for what might be required. The problem is that the modern environment rarely provides the cues that once allowed the brain to stand down. Silence, comfort, and inactivity are not enough. Without a clear sense of completion, the brain does not shift into a recovery state. This explains why rest can feel mentally heavy. The body is waiting for the brain to signal that it is safe to restore fully. The brain, in turn, is waiting for evidence that the future will not immediately demand action. This loop can persist for hours or days. It is especially noticeable when life becomes quieter, as it often does later in life. With fewer external demands, the internal process becomes more visible. Fatigue emerges not from doing too much, but from never fully finishing. Understanding this reveals an important truth. Feeling tired while resting does not mean the body or mind is malfunctioning. It means the system that governs energy is still oriented toward prediction rather than restoration. The question that remains is how this predictive state of the brain interacts with the nervous system that controls vigilance and alertness, shaping the experience of rest itself. The human nervous system evolved to prioritize alertness over comfort. For most of our history, being slightly tense was safer than being deeply relaxed. The system that controls vigilance developed under constant pressure to detect change. A small sound, a shift in temperature, or an unfamiliar movement could signal danger. Missing these signals could be fatal. Because of this, the nervous system learned to stay active even during periods of rest. It reduced intensity, but it did not shut down. This low-level alertness became the default state whenever the environment was uncertain. Over time, this shaped a body that rarely experiences full nervous system quiet. Rest meant reducing movement, not disengaging awareness. This pattern remains deeply ingrained. In modern life, the nervous system still behaves as if subtle threats might appear at any moment. Even when the surroundings are safe, the system continues to scan. This scanning consumes energy continuously. It does not feel dramatic. It feels like background tension, shallow breathing, or a vague sense of unease. Over long periods, this constant activity contributes to fatigue. The person may feel tired without understanding why. From the nervous system's perspective, it has been working non-stop. It has been maintaining readiness without resolution. This is especially relevant during rest. When a person stops moving, the nervous system does not interpret stillness as a signal to relax. Instead, it often increases sensitivity. Movement provides feedback and context. Stillness removes those cues, making the environment harder to predict. In response, the nervous system heightens alertness slightly. This response made sense in the past. A resting human was more vulnerable than a moving one. The body compensated by staying ready. In modern settings, this same response can feel draining. The body lies still, but the nervous system remains engaged. This engagement costs energy, even though no action follows. Over time, the energy spent on vigilance outweighs the energy restored by rest. This imbalance becomes more noticeable with age. As the nervous system ages, it becomes less flexible. It is slower to switch states. Once alertness is engaged, it takes longer to release. Older adults often report feeling keyed up internally, even when life is calm. They may rest for long periods but still feel tired. This reflects a nervous system that has spent decades reinforcing alertness as a default. The system has learned that vigilance keeps one alive. It has not learned that prolonged safety allows it to stand down. Modern environments provide comfort, but they do not retrain the nervous system. The system responds to patterns it recognizes, not to assurances. Quiet rooms and soft beds are new in evolutionary terms. The nervous system has no long history of associating them with safety. As a result, it continues to operate under older rules. It stays partially activated, even when nothing is required. This partial activation is subtle but persistent. It shapes breathing, heart rate, and muscle tone. None of these rise to the level of alarm, but they never fully settle either. Over hours of rest, this low-level activity accumulates as fatigue. The person feels worn down by doing nothing. This experience can be confusing and frustrating, yet it is not a failure of rest. It is the outcome of a nervous system designed to protect, not to relax. Understanding this helps clarify why rest alone often fails to restore energy. The issue is not the amount of rest, but the state of the nervous system during that rest. Until the nervous system shifts from vigilance to true safety, fatigue may persist. The question that follows is what signals the nervous system recognizes as permission to reduce alertness, and why those signals are so rare in modern rest. The nervous system does not respond primarily to logic or reassurance. It responds to patterns it has learned to associate with safety or danger. Throughout human evolution, safety was not defined by comfort, silence, or stillness. It was defined by clear signals that threats had passed and would not immediately return. These signals were physical and contextual. Distance from danger, successful escape, the presence of trusted group members, and the completion of effort all mattered. When these conditions were met, the nervous system could gradually reduce alertness. Importantly, this reduction was temporary. It lasted only as long as the environment continued to confirm safety. In modern life, many of these confirming signals are absent. A quiet room does not prove that the future is secure. A soft chair does not signal that vigilance is no longer needed. The nervous system does not recognize modern symbols of comfort as reliable indicators. As a result, it maintains a baseline level of alertness, even during extended rest. This alertness is not conscious fear. It is a subtle readiness that influences breathing, posture, and muscle tone. The body may appear relaxed, but internally it remains prepared. This preparation costs energy. Over time, the energy used to maintain this state contributes to persistent fatigue. The person feels tired without having exerted themselves. This effect becomes more pronounced with age. The nervous system becomes less adaptable over time. It has spent decades reinforcing certain responses, and it is slower to shift into unfamiliar states. For someone over 65, the nervous system has practiced vigilance far more than deep relaxation. It has learned to stay alert through countless nights, worries, responsibilities, and uncertainties. Even when those pressures lessen, the system does not automatically update its expectations. It continues to operate as if alertness is required. Rest becomes a period of suspended readiness rather than true recovery. Another factor is that modern rest often lacks clear beginnings and endings. In earlier environments, rest followed effort. The body could feel that something had been completed. In contrast, modern rest often arrives without physical exhaustion or clear resolution. One simply stops moving. From the nervous system's perspective, nothing has ended. There is no signal to stand down. Without a sense of completion, alertness remains engaged. This creates a loop. The body rests, but the nervous system stays active. The nervous system stays active, so the body does not recover. Over hours and days, this loop produces fatigue that rest does not relieve. This fatigue is often described as dull, heavy, or draining rather than sharp or overwhelming. It reflects ongoing background work rather than acute stress. Many older adults recognize this feeling well. They may say they are tired all the time, even though their days are quiet. This does not mean the nervous system is broken. It means it is doing what it has always done. It is protecting against uncertainty. The challenge is that uncertainty has changed form. It is no longer physical danger, but time, memory, and anticipation. The nervous system does not distinguish between these forms easily. It responds to all uncertainty with readiness. Understanding this helps explain why rest can feel unsatisfying. The nervous system is waiting for signals it rarely receives. Until those signals appear, it continues to consume energy quietly. The question that follows is how modern life, especially in older age, amplifies this problem by removing movement, structure, and clear resolution from daily experience, further confusing a system that depends on them. As life slows down, the nervous system faces a situation it was never trained for. Long periods of stillness without clear purpose were rare in human history. Movement once structured the day. Walking, gathering, working, and traveling created natural rhythms of effort and release. These rhythms help the nervous system understand when to engage and when to let go. In modern life, especially later in life, those rhythms often fade. Days become quieter. Physical demands lessen. Time stretches without obvious markers. For the nervous system, this lack of structure creates confusion. Without movement to signal effort, and without clear endpoints to signal completion, alertness does not resolve. Instead, it lingers. The nervous system remains active, scanning for meaning and expectation in an environment that offers few clear cues. This sustained low-level activity quietly consumes energy. It does not feel like stress in the usual sense. It feels like background fatigue that never fully lifts. For older adults, this experience can be particularly strong. The nervous system has decades of practice responding to responsibility and vigilance. When external demands decrease, the internal system does not automatically follow. It continues to operate as if something is about to be required. In the absence of movement, alertness turns inward. Sensations are monitored more closely. Small discomforts feel larger. Thoughts circulate without resolution. None of this is intense, but it is constant. The nervous system is still working, even when the body appears at rest. This work has a cost. Over hours of inactivity, the energy spent maintaining alertness exceeds the energy restored by rest. The result is a paradoxical outcome. The more one rests, the more tired one may feel. This is not because rest is harmful, but because the nervous system has not been given the signals it needs to disengage. In earlier life, those signals often came from physical completion. Tasks ended. Journeys stopped. The body could feel that something was finished. In quieter modern routines, especially after retirement, those endings are less frequent. The nervous system waits for closure that does not arrive. This waiting becomes the dominant state. Over time, it shapes the experience of rest itself. Rest feels unfinished, suspended, and slightly draining. Many older adults describe feeling tired but unable to explain why. They may rest more than ever, yet feel less restored. This is not a failure of aging, nor a sign that something is wrong. It reflects a nervous system operating without the structure it evolved to depend on. The system does not know how to interpret long, open periods of stillness. It treats them as uncertainty, and uncertainty, in evolutionary terms, always required readiness. Understanding this helps reframe fatigue in later life. It suggests that tiredness during rest is not simply about physical decline. It is about a nervous system waiting for signals that modern life no longer provides. This insight does not yet offer a solution. It simply clarifies the source of the problem. The next question is how this constant state of readiness interacts with awareness itself, and why the simple act of being conscious can feel exhausting even in the absence of effort. Awareness itself carries a cost. To be conscious is not a neutral state for the human brain. From an evolutionary perspective, awareness existed to detect change, anticipate danger, and guide action. A mind that noticed more survived longer. Because of this, the brain became an organ that is almost never truly at rest. Even when the body is still, awareness continues. Sounds are registered, sensations are interpreted, and memories drift through attention. This constant activity consumes energy. In early human life, this cost was balanced by frequent periods of physical exertion and clear outcomes. Awareness was directed outward, toward the environment and immediate needs. When those needs were resolved, awareness could soften temporarily. In modern rest, awareness often turns inward. With fewer external demands, the mind begins to monitor itself. Sensations, thoughts, and memories receive more attention. This inward focus keeps the brain active in a different way. It is not intense, but it is continuous. The brain evaluates posture, breathing, comfort, and time passing. Each small act of evaluation requires energy. Over long periods of rest, this energy use becomes noticeable as fatigue. The person may feel tired simply from being awake. This experience is common, especially later in life. As physical movement decreases, awareness has fewer external anchors. The mind has more space to wander. It revisits past events, anticipates future uncertainties, or quietly scans the body for signs of discomfort. None of this feels like effort, yet it engages neural systems that evolved for problem solving and prediction. The brain does not distinguish between useful and unnecessary monitoring. It treats all awareness as potentially important. As a result, it continues to work even when nothing is required. In evolutionary terms, this made sense. A mind that stayed alert during rest was less likely to miss subtle threats. In modern life, however, this persistent awareness can become tiring. The brain remains active without resolution. Rest does not silence awareness. It often amplifies it. For older adults, this effect can feel stronger. With fewer daily tasks and more unstructured time, awareness has little to attach to. The mind remains present, but without direction. This presence consumes energy steadily. Over hours, the cost accumulates. The person may feel drained despite doing very little. This fatigue is not a sign of weakness. It reflects the basic cost of consciousness in a brain designed for survival. The brain was never meant to remain quietly aware for long stretches without action or outcome. Modern rest creates exactly this condition. The body is still, but awareness continues. Without clear signals to disengage, the brain maintains activity. Understanding this helps explain why rest does not always feel restorative. Recovery requires not only physical stillness, but a reduction in unnecessary awareness. Yet awareness is difficult to quiet because it is central to being human. The challenge is not that the mind is too active, but that it is doing what it evolved to do in a context that no longer requires it. This sets the stage for understanding why even calm, quiet moments can feel mentally tiring, and why the brain's relationship with rest becomes more complex as life slows down. When awareness turns inward, it changes how the brain uses energy. Instead of responding to the outside world, the mind begins to observe sensations, memories, and the passage of time. This inward attention was never meant to dominate long periods. In early human life, inward focus was brief. It appeared during injury, illness, or moments of reflection, then faded as external demands returned. Most awareness was directed outward, toward movement, coordination, and immediate survival. Modern rest reverses this balance. When the body is still and the environment is quiet, awareness has nowhere to go but inward. The brain begins to notice subtle bodily sensations that would once have been irrelevant. A small ache, a change in breathing, or a shift in comfort becomes a point of focus. Each sensation invites interpretation. The brain asks whether it matters, whether it signals a problem, whether something should be done. This evaluation process consumes energy continuously. It does not feel like thinking in the usual sense, but it keeps neural circuits active. Over time, this inward monitoring contributes to fatigue. The person rests, yet feels mentally occupied. This effect grows stronger with age. The body carries more sensations as it ages, more stiffness, more variability, more reminders of past strain. Each sensation becomes a potential signal. The brain, trained to protect, does not ignore them easily. It monitors, compares, and predicts. This constant low-level processing adds to the cost of awareness. Rest becomes a time when the mind works harder, not less. Instead of distraction, there is exposure. The quiet amplifies what is already present. For many older adults, this makes rest feel strangely demanding. Lying down does not bring relief, because awareness fills the space that activity once occupied. The brain remains engaged without resolution. In evolutionary terms, this inward vigilance was useful. A body that noticed internal changes early could respond before they became dangerous. But in modern life, this same vigilance can feel draining. The brain continues to scan for meaning where none is required. It does not know how to disengage from monitoring once it has begun. Without clear external tasks, awareness sustains itself. This sustained awareness is not calm. It is neutral, but active. It holds attention without satisfaction. Over long periods, this state uses more energy than expected. The person feels tired simply from being present. This helps explain why rest sometimes feels more exhausting than gentle activity. Activity directs awareness outward and gives it purpose. Stillness removes that direction. The brain remains active but unfulfilled. It continues to process without outcome. This is not a flaw of modern individuals. It is a mismatch between how awareness evolved and how rest is now experienced. Understanding this shifts the focus again. Fatigue during rest is not only about muscles or sleep, it is also about where awareness goes when there is nothing to do. The next question is how this constant inward awareness interacts with memory, especially long-term memory, which becomes more dominant with age and further shapes the experience of tiredness during rest. As awareness remains active, it naturally draws on memory. The human brain does not experience the present moment alone. It constantly compares what is happening now with what has happened before. This comparison helps predict what might come next. In early human life, memory served immediate survival. Past dangers informed present caution. Remembered success guided future action. Memory was closely tied to movement and outcome. It supported behavior, then receded. In modern rest, memory has more room to surface. When the body is still and the environment quiet, there is little to anchor attention to the present. The mind drifts backward. Experiences from many years rise without invitation. Some are neutral, some unresolved, some quietly emotional. None of them require action, yet each activates the brain. Recalling even simple events engages networks involved in evaluation and prediction. The brain asks what they mean, whether they matter now, whether they might return. This process consumes energy steadily. It does not feel like effort, but it is work. With age, memory becomes richer and heavier. Decades of experience create a large internal landscape. During rest, awareness moves through this landscape more often. The brain revisits familiar paths because there is little else to attend to. This revisiting is not intentional. It is automatic. The brain is doing what it evolved to do: learn from the past to prepare for the future. The problem is that in rest, there is often no future action required. The memory process continues without resolution. This creates a subtle form of mental load. The person rests physically but carries the weight of many remembered moments. Over time, this contributes to fatigue. The tiredness is not tied to any single thought. It is the cumulative cost of ongoing recall and evaluation. Older adults often notice this as a sense of being worn down by quiet time. Moments meant for rest become filled with reflection. The mind is active even when the body is not. In evolutionary terms, this activity once had a purpose. A brain that reviewed experience during downtime could improve future survival. But modern rest offers long periods with no immediate application. Memory activity stretches on without conclusion. The brain does not know when to stop. It remains engaged, quietly consuming energy. This helps explain why rest can feel mentally tiring, even in the absence of stress. The fatigue does not come from worry alone. It comes from the constant linking of present awareness with past experience. The brain is maintaining continuity across time. That continuity has a cost. Understanding this deepens the picture of why rest often fails to restore energy fully. It is not only the nervous system staying alert, and not only awareness staying active. It is also memory continuously feeding the system with material to process. The body rests, but the mind carries history forward. This does not mean memory is harmful. It means that a brain built to learn never truly idles. The question that follows is how this constant mental continuity shapes the experience of time itself, and why time can feel heavier and more draining during rest, especially later in life. The human body expects rest to follow movement. Throughout evolution, stillness was meaningful only after effort. Walking long distances, gathering food, building shelter, and defending territory created a clear physical arc. Energy was spent, muscles were loaded, and systems were activated. When movement stopped, the body recognized that something had been completed. Rest made sense because it followed exertion. This sequence trained the body to associate recovery with prior action. Without that sequence, rest had little meaning. In modern life, especially later in life, this order is often reversed or broken. Long periods of stillness occur without preceding effort. The body is asked to rest without having spent energy in a way it recognizes. From a biological perspective, this is confusing. The systems responsible for recovery look for signs that energy has been used and needs to be restored. When those signs are absent, recovery does not fully engage. The body remains in a holding state, neither active nor restored. This state consumes energy quietly. The person feels tired even though they have done very little. For older adults, this mismatch becomes more apparent. Physical activity naturally decreases with age. Movement becomes shorter, gentler, and less frequent, yet rest increases. The body spends more time in stillness than ever before. Because this stillness is not paired with meaningful exertion, it does not trigger deep recovery. Instead, it prolongs a state of low-level engagement. Muscles remain partially active, circulation slows unevenly, and metabolic processes do not shift fully into repair. None of this feels dramatic. It accumulates gradually as fatigue. In earlier environments, even small amounts of rest were earned through effort. A day of movement ended with stillness that felt deserved. The body recognized that energy had been spent and needed replenishment. Modern rest often lacks this sense of completion. Sitting quietly does not signal that a cycle has ended. The body waits for exertion that does not come. In this waiting, energy remains regulated rather than restored. This explains why gentle activity can sometimes feel more refreshing than extended rest. Movement provides context. It tells the body that energy has been used and can now be recovered. Without movement, rest lacks direction. The body does not know what it is resting from. This problem is not about intensity, it is about recognition. The body evolved to respond to patterns, not to comfort. A soft chair does not complete a biological cycle. A long period of inactivity does not satisfy the systems that govern recovery. As life becomes quieter, especially after retirement, daily routines may no longer include clear beginnings and endings. Tasks blur together or disappear. The body loses the signals it once relied on to organize energy use. Rest becomes constant rather than earned. Constant rest, paradoxically, can feel draining. The body remains slightly active, waiting for movement that would justify recovery. Over time, this produces a sense of tiredness that does not improve with more stillness. Understanding this helps reframe fatigue in later life. It is not simply that the body is weaker, it is that the relationship between movement and rest has been altered. The body still expects recovery to follow effort. When that expectation is not met, recovery remains incomplete. This insight shifts attention away from rest duration and toward the structure of activity. The question that follows is how this mismatch between movement and stillness affects the body's internal rhythms, and why time itself begins to feel heavier when days contain little physical change. Movement does more than spend energy. It organizes time inside the body. When humans move, internal rhythms align around action and recovery. Heart rate rises and falls, breathing deepens and slows, and circulation shifts to meet demand. These changes create clear phases that the body can follow. Effort builds, then releases. Rest arrives with meaning because it follows a peak. In early human life, these cycles were repeated daily. Walking, lifting, and working shaped time into segments the body could recognize. Modern life often removes these segments. Especially in later years, days may pass with little variation in physical demand. Without peaks of effort, there are no clear valleys of recovery. Time becomes flat. The body continues to function, but its internal rhythms lose definition. Rest spreads across the day instead of arriving at specific moments. This constant rest blurs the signals the body relies on to regulate energy. Instead of shifting into recovery, the body remains in a neutral, suspended state. This suspension consumes energy steadily. The person feels tired, not because they are doing too much, but because nothing is clearly beginning or ending. For older adults, this flattening of time can feel particularly draining. Retirement and reduced obligations remove many external markers that once structured the day. Meals, sleep, and quiet activities remain, but physical effort no longer punctuates time. The body loses its reference points. Without movement to reset internal rhythms, systems drift out of sync. Circulation becomes less dynamic, muscle engagement stays low but constant, and metabolism slows unevenly. None of this causes immediate discomfort, but it contributes to a persistent sense of heaviness. Rest no longer feels like a reward. It feels like the default. In evolutionary terms, this situation was rare. Long stretches of inactivity without illness or injury were uncommon. The body was not designed to manage time without movement. It expects change. Movement tells the body that time is passing in a meaningful way. Without it, awareness stretches and fatigue grows. This helps explain why light activity can sometimes restore energy more effectively than extended rest. Activity creates contrast. It gives the body something to recover from. Without contrast, rest loses its restorative function. The body does not know when to switch modes. It stays partially engaged, maintaining background processes without resolution. Over days and weeks, this low-level engagement accumulates as tiredness. People may describe feeling worn down by quiet days. The fatigue is not dramatic, but it is persistent. It reflects a body waiting for rhythm. This waiting has a cost. Understanding this shifts the focus again. Fatigue during rest is not just about how much one rests, but about how time is structured within the body. When days lack physical variation, rest becomes indistinct. The body remains in a prolonged in-between state, neither active nor restored. The question that follows is how this loss of rhythm interacts with sleep itself, and why sleep may fail to fully compensate for fatigue created during waking rest. Sleep is often expected to compensate for fatigue created during the day, yet sleep itself evolved within the same pattern of effort and release. In early human life, sleep followed physical exhaustion, environmental resolution, and social closure. The body entered sleep after a day that had clear demands and clear endings. Under those conditions, sleep functioned as deep recovery. Energy was restored because it had been clearly spent. In modern life, especially later in life, sleep often follows days without strong physical contrast. The body arrives at night without having completed the cycles it recognizes. As a result, sleep may be lighter and less restorative, even if it lasts many hours. The body enters sleep carrying unresolved readiness. Muscles relax only partially, and the nervous system remains mildly active. This limits how much recovery sleep can provide. When waking arrives, fatigue remains. This fatigue is then carried into the next period of rest, creating a loop. Rest during the day feels draining, sleep at night feels insufficient, and the cycle repeats. For older adults, this pattern can become stable. Nights are long, days are quiet, and neither brings full restoration. This does not mean sleep quality is poor in a clinical sense. It means sleep is being asked to do more than it evolved to do. Sleep alone cannot resolve fatigue that originates from a lack of daytime rhythm. The body expects recovery to be distributed across movement, rest, and sleep. When movement is minimal, the burden shifts disproportionately onto sleep. Sleep then becomes less effective, not because it fails, but because the conditions for deep recovery were never met. This helps explain why many people feel tired despite sleeping enough hours. The problem is not duration, it is context. Sleep is a phase, not a solution by itself. Without preceding effort and clear transitions, sleep cannot complete the cycle. In evolutionary terms, this made sense. A body that slept deeply without having expended energy risked waking unprepared. Light sleep preserved readiness. Modern life recreates this condition unintentionally. The body enters sleep without having clearly earned it, and so it does not surrender fully. The nervous system stays partially alert. Over time, this reduces the restorative power of sleep. Waking rest then feels heavier, because it follows incomplete recovery. The person rests more, sleeps more, yet feels less restored. This experience is common in later life. and it is often misunderstood. It is not a failure of sleep, nor a sign of decline alone. It is a mismatch between how recovery evolved and how time is now structured. Understanding this clarifies why addressing fatigue requires more than increasing rest or sleep. It requires recognizing that recovery depends on sequence. Effort gives rest meaning. Rest gives sleep depth. When effort is missing, the entire system becomes shallow. Fatigue then appears everywhere, including during rest itself. This does not yet suggest a remedy. It only reveals the structure of the problem. The question that follows is how the body's long memory of stress and responsibility interacts with this disrupted rhythm, especially in those who have spent a lifetime responding to demands, and why that memory continues to shape fatigue even when demands have faded. The human body carries history within it. Stress does not disappear when circumstances change. It leaves traces in posture, breathing patterns, muscle tone, and nervous system responses. Over a lifetime, repeated exposure to responsibility, uncertainty, and pressure teaches the body how to prepare. This preparation becomes habitual. Even when external demands fade, the internal patterns remain. In early human life, stress was episodic. It rose quickly in response to danger, then fell once the threat passed. The body returned to a baseline that allowed recovery. Modern life changed this pattern. Stress became prolonged and diffuse. Responsibilities stretched across years rather than moments. Work, caregiving, social obligation, and financial concern created sustained pressure. The body adapted by maintaining readiness over long periods. This adaptation helped people function, but it came with a cost. The nervous system learned that vigilance was not temporary. It became a background state. By later life, this background readiness may feel normal, even when it is no longer required. When a person finally has time to rest, the body does not immediately recognize the change. It continues to operate under assumptions learned over decades. Rest arrives, but the body remains prepared. This preparation is subtle. It does not feel like anxiety or fear. It feels like tension without urgency, alertness without focus. Maintaining this state requires energy. Over hours of rest, that energy use becomes fatigue. The person may feel tired despite having few demands. This tiredness is not explained by the present moment alone. It reflects the accumulation of past strain. The body remembers what the mind has moved past. For older adults, this effect can be especially strong. Many have spent a lifetime responding to needs beyond themselves. The body learned to stay ready because it had to. When those roles end, the nervous system does not reset automatically. It continues to prepare for what it expects based on history. Rest then becomes a time when these patterns surface. Without distraction, the body expresses its long-held readiness as fatigue. This fatigue is not a sign of weakness. It is the residue of adaptation. The body adapted to survive long periods of demand, and it does not easily unlearn that lesson. Understanding this shifts the meaning of tiredness during rest. It suggests that fatigue is not always about the present, but about the past continuing into the present. The body is responding to a lifetime of signals that taught it to stay alert. Rest does not erase those signals, it reveals them. The question that follows is how this stored stress interacts with aging physiology itself, and why the same patterns that once supported endurance now contribute to fatigue when recovery becomes more limited. As the body ages, its ability to absorb and release stress changes. Systems that once adapted quickly become slower and less flexible. Muscles recover more gradually, circulation responds less dynamically, and the nervous system takes longer to shift states. This does not mean the body is failing. It means it is operating with reduced margin. When long-term stress patterns are layered onto this changing physiology, their effects become more visible. A nervous system that learned to stay alert over decades now has fewer resources to sustain that alertness without cost. What once felt manageable now feels tiring. Rest does not immediately undo this fatigue because the underlying patterns remain active. The body continues to prepare even when preparation is no longer needed. In earlier life, energy reserves were larger. The cost of holding readiness could be absorbed without noticeable fatigue. In later life, reserves are smaller. The same background activity now produces a clear sensation of tiredness. This is why many older adults feel fatigue during periods that appear calm. The body is still running processes shaped by past demands, but it no longer has the same capacity to support them quietly. Aging also changes how the body clears the byproducts of stress. Hormonal signals linger longer, and muscle tension releases more slowly. Even when the mind feels settled, the body may remain engaged. This creates a disconnect between perception and sensation. A person believes they are resting, yet the body is still processing old patterns. Over time, this processing feels like weariness. It is not sharp or urgent. It is diffuse and persist. Modern rest often exposes this contrast. With fewer distractions and obligations, the body's internal state becomes more noticeable. The quiet allows long-held tension to surface as fatigue. This can be confusing. People may ask why they feel more tired now, even though life is simpler. The answer lies not in current effort, but in cumulative load. The body has been carrying responsibility for a long time. It does not drop that load quickly. In evolutionary terms, this persistence was protective. A body that remained cautious after repeated danger survived longer. But modern aging extends beyond the period those adaptations were designed for. The body continues to behave as if sustained readiness is required, even when circumstances have changed. This mismatch creates fatigue during rest. Importantly, this fatigue is not a sign that rest is ineffective. It is a sign that rest is revealing processes that have been running quietly for years. Understanding this reframes tiredness as information rather than failure. It tells a story about what the body has endured and how it has adapted. The question that follows is how this long-term stress memory interacts with emotional regulation, and why feelings such as concern, responsibility, or unfinished business continue to influence energy levels even when life has slowed down. Emotional regulation has always been tied to survival. In early human life, emotions signaled what mattered most. Fear directed attention toward danger. Concern kept individuals alert to potential loss. Responsibility strengthened bonds within the group. These emotional states were not optional. They supported survival and cohesion. Over a lifetime, repeatedly engaging these emotions trained the body to respond quickly and consistently. Emotional readiness became physical readiness. The body learned to prepare whenever concern arose, even subtly. Muscles tightened, breathing adjusted, and energy was mobilized. In modern life, especially across many decades, these emotional responses often persist long after their original purpose has faded. Responsibilities may lessen, but the emotional patterns remain. The body continues to respond to concern as if action is required. Even mild emotional states can trigger physiological preparation. This preparation consumes energy quietly. During rest, when there is little external distraction, emotional patterns become more noticeable. Thoughts about family, health, unfinished responsibilities, or the passage of time surface naturally. None of these thoughts demand immediate action, yet the body responds as if they might. Emotional readiness activates the same systems that once supported survival. Over time, this activation contributes to fatigue. The person rests, but the body remains engaged. This is especially common later in life. Emotional memory deepens with age. Experiences accumulate, relationships become layered, and the sense of responsibility often extends beyond immediate action. The body has learned to stay ready for others. When external demands decrease, the emotional system does not automatically disengage. It continues to monitor, anticipate, and prepare. This ongoing engagement has a cost. The cost is not dramatic stress, but sustained low-level effort. Over hours of rest, this effort feels like tiredness. The fatigue is not tied to any one emotion. It arises from the persistence of emotional readiness itself. In evolutionary terms, this persistence was beneficial. A group member who remained emotionally engaged was more reliable, but modern rest exposes the downside. The body does not know when emotional work is finished. There is no clear signal that responsibility has ended. Without that signal, emotional systems remain active. This activity influences the nervous system, keeping it from fully settling. The result is rest that feels incomplete. Older adults often describe feeling tired while resting, yet emotionally alert. They may feel calm, but not released. This reflects a body that has spent a lifetime responding to emotional cues and has not learned to turn them off. Understanding this helps clarify why fatigue during rest is so common later in life. It is not only about physical decline or lack of sleep. It is about emotional systems continuing to operate in the absence of immediate need. The body carries its emotional history forward. Rest does not erase that history. It brings it into awareness. This insight completes another layer of the picture. Fatigue during rest is shaped by evolution, energy conservation, nervous system vigilance, awareness, movement, stress, memory, and emotional persistence. The remaining question is how all these layers come together to shape the overall experience of being tired, even when nothing is being done, and whether this state carries a deeper message about how humans relate to rest itself. As humans age, the way energy is produced and recycled inside the body slowly changes. Cells become less efficient at converting fuel into usable energy, and recovery from even mild strain takes longer. This shift is gradual and often unnoticed at first. It does not announce itself with pain or illness. It appears as a quieter change in endurance. Activities that once restored energy now simply maintain it. Rest no longer refills the system in the same way. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense. Human bodies were shaped to function well through the years most relevant to reproduction and survival of offspring. There was little selective pressure to maintain high efficiency deep into old age. As a result, the aging body operates with narrower margins. Energy must be managed more carefully. When recovery slows, any background activity becomes more costly. Systems that once ran quietly now draw noticeable energy. During rest, this becomes apparent. The body is still performing essential maintenance, but with fewer resources. Processes such as tissue repair, immune regulation, and neural upkeep continue, but they proceed more slowly and with greater effort. The person feels tired even while resting because the body is busy, not idle. This work is invisible. It does not feel like exertion, yet it consumes energy steadily. Older adults often sense this as a general heaviness rather than sharp fatigue. It is the feeling of a system working close to its limits. Rest does not stop this work. In fact, rest often reveals it. Without external activity to distract attention, the sensation of low energy becomes more noticeable. This is not a failure of rest, but a reflection of changing physiology. The body is prioritizing maintenance over restoration. It is keeping systems functioning rather than building surplus. In earlier life, rest could create extra energy. In later life, rest often preserves balance. This difference matters. Expecting the same feeling of renewal can lead to frustration. The body is no longer designed to bounce back quickly. It is designed to endure. This endurance comes with a constant, gentle demand on energy. Over time, this demand is felt as fatigue, even in calm moments. Understanding this helps reframe tiredness as a normal signal of an aging system doing its work. It is not an error. It is information. The body is telling the truth about its capacity. The question that follows is how differences between individuals shape this experience, and why some people feel this change more strongly than others, even at the same age. Not all aging bodies experience fatigue in the same way. Even among people of similar age, some feel persistently tired during rest, while others maintain a sense of steadiness and balance. This variation reflects differences in how individual bodies have distributed energy across a lifetime. From early adulthood onward, the body makes trade-offs. Energy is allocated toward work, caregiving, physical labor, or long periods of responsibility. Over time, these choices shape how much reserve remains available later. Bodies that spent decades under sustained demand often arrive in later life with less flexibility. Their systems have been tuned for output rather than renewal. In contrast, bodies that experience more variation between effort and recovery may retain greater adaptability. This does not mean one path is better than another. It means the body records how it has been used. These records influence how rest is experienced. For those whose lives required constant engagement, rest can feel unfamiliar. The body does not easily shift into a recovery state because it has practiced readiness far more than release. During rest, the system remains partially engaged, drawing on limited reserves. Fatigue emerges not because the person is doing too much now, but because the body is carrying forward patterns from the past. Genetics also plays a role. Some bodies are naturally more efficient at repairing cellular damage or regulating stress hormones. Others expend more energy to achieve the same balance. These differences were once neutral or even beneficial depending on environment. In later life, they become more visible. A body that once thrived under pressure may now feel tired during calm. Another body may adapt more easily to slower rhythms. Neither outcome reflects character or effort. They reflect design, interacting with history. Lifestyle across decades further shapes this picture. Repeated sleep disruption, irregular movement, or prolonged stress gradually influence how energy systems age. The effects accumulate quietly. By the time rest becomes abundant, the body's capacity to use it fully may be limited. This can feel unfair. People may wonder why rest does not bring relief after a lifetime of work. The answer lies not in the present moment, but in the long arc of adaptation. The body does not reset. It carries forward what it has learned. During rest, this learning expresses itself as fatigue. The sensation is not random. It reflects how energy has been managed across many years. Understanding this helps reduce comparison. Fatigue during rest is deeply individual. It cannot be judged against others' experiences. Each body arrives at later life with a unique history of use and recovery. Rest reveals that history, rather than erasing it. This perspective shifts the question again. Instead of asking why rest fails, it becomes more useful to ask what kind of rest the body has learned to recognize. The answer is different for each person. The remaining question is how awareness of these differences might change the way rest is approached, and whether acknowledging limits rather than resisting them alters the experience of fatigue itself. As bodies age and differences become clearer, expectations play a quiet but powerful role in how fatigue is experienced. Many people carry an unspoken belief that rest should feel rewarding, that stopping should bring relief, and that tiredness during calm signals something wrong. These expectations are shaped by earlier life, when rest often did restore energy quickly. When the aging body no longer responds in the same way, disappointment adds another layer to fatigue. The body feels tired, and the mind resists that feeling. This resistance itself consumes energy. Instead of allowing tiredness to exist, the person measures it against how rest used to feel. The comparison keeps awareness engaged. The body remains in a state of evaluation rather than acceptance. In evolutionary terms, there was little reason to compare present capacity with past capacity. Survival focused on what could be done now. Modern self-awareness introduces a new factor. The mind tracks decline, change, and difference. This tracking keeps the nervous system subtly active. During rest, attention returns again and again to the sensation of tiredness. The body senses being watched. This attention amplifies the experience. Fatigue feels heavier because it is being observed and judged. For older adults, this loop can become familiar. Rest becomes a time when the body's limits are most noticeable. Instead of distraction, there is reflection. The body feels slower, and the mind notices. This noticing does not cause fatigue, but it deepens it. The system stays alert, trying to understand or fix what is happening. Energy is spent on interpretation rather than recovery. Over time, this can make rest feel emotionally and physically draining. This does not mean expectations are wrong. They are natural. They arise from a lifetime of experience. But they interact with aging physiology in a way that shapes fatigue. When rest is expected to restore more than the body can provide, the gap is felt as exhaustion. The body is doing its work within limits, but the mind is asking for a past response. This mismatch keeps the system active. Understanding this helps soften the experience. It suggests that part of the tiredness during rest comes not from the body alone, but from the relationship between the body and the mind. Fatigue is felt more strongly when it is resisted. When rest is used to test capacity, rather than to simply exist, the body does not settle. It continues to signal its limits. This perspective does not remove tiredness, but it changes how it is held. It shifts rest from a demand to an allowance. The body is not asked to produce a feeling it can no longer guarantee. It is allowed to be as it is. This subtle shift can reduce the extra energy spent on evaluation. The nervous system may not fully relax, but it may stop working against itself. The question that follows is how this acceptance interacts with the broader meaning of rest in human life, and whether rest is less about restoring energy and more about learning how to live within changing limits. Time changes how the human body relates to the world. As years pass, the sense of urgency that once guided action gradually fades, but awareness of time itself grows stronger. In early life, time is experienced through movement and milestones. Days are filled with tasks, transitions, and goals. Time passes without being noticed because attention is directed outward. In later life, especially when routines slow, time becomes more visible. Hours stretch. Quiet moments expand. The body rests, but awareness remains present with little to occupy it. This heightened awareness of time alters how fatigue is felt. The body is still working, but the mind has more space to notice every signal. Small sensations of low energy feel larger when nothing else competes for attention. In evolutionary terms, this prolonged awareness of time was uncommon. Human lives were shorter, and daily survival required constant engagement. There was little opportunity to sit quietly and observe time passing. Modern longevity creates a new condition. Long periods of rest are combined with long awareness. The brain remains awake to duration itself. This awareness consumes energy. Monitoring time, even passively, engages memory and prediction. The mind notes how long one has been resting, how little has changed, and how fatigue remains. This noticing does not solve anything, but it keeps the system active. For older adults, this experience can feel like being tired of time itself. Rest does not shorten the day, it makes its length more apparent. The body senses that energy is limited, and the mind senses that time is abundant. This imbalance creates a subtle strain. The body continues to perform maintenance, but the mind watches and waits. This waiting is not calm, it is neutral but effortful. Over hours it becomes tiring. Many people describe feeling worn down simply by the passage of quiet time. This is not boredom alone. It is the cost of sustained awareness without change. In earlier life, change came naturally through activity. In later life, change must be created deliberately, or awareness settles into watching. The body did not evolve to support long periods of unchanging awareness. It expects variation. Without it, fatigue emerges. This fatigue is often misunderstood as a lack of rest or poor sleep. In reality, it reflects a deeper interaction between time, awareness, and aging physiology. The body is resting, but the mind is measuring. The system remains engaged. Understanding this helps explain why rest can feel heavier as time becomes more noticeable. Fatigue during rest is not only about energy loss, it is also about time felt without movement. The question that follows is how this prolonged awareness of time interacts with meaning and purpose, and why the absence of clear purpose can further deepen the sensation of tiredness during rest. When time stretches, the question of purpose becomes harder to avoid. In early human life, purpose was embedded in daily action. Finding food, protecting others, maintaining shelter, and responding to immediate needs gave direction to movement and rest alike. Rest existed in relation to purpose. It was a pause between actions that clearly mattered. In modern later life, especially after major responsibilities end, purpose can become less obvious. Days may contain fewer demands that require effort or decision. Rest becomes the default state rather than a transition. Without clear purpose to frame it, rest can feel empty rather than restorative. The body is still conserving energy, but the mind searches for meaning. This search engages awareness and memory, keeping the system active. Fatigue deepens not because energy is gone, but because rest lacks direction. In evolutionary terms, purposeless rest was rare. Stillness usually followed action that served survival. Modern longevity creates long periods where survival is no longer the primary concern, yet the body and mind still expect structure. When purpose fades, awareness turns inward again. The mind asks what this time is for, even quietly. The nervous system responds to uncertainty with readiness. This readiness consumes energy. Over hours of quiet rest, the cost becomes noticeable. The person feels tired but not relieved by stopping. For older adults, this experience can be especially strong. Many have spent decades oriented around responsibility. When those roles diminish, rest arrives without context. The body stops moving, but the mind does not stop orienting. It looks for cues that once came naturally. Without them, the system remains active. Fatigue emerges as a signal of unresolved orientation. The body is waiting for direction that does not come. This does not mean that purpose must be grand or external. In evolutionary terms, purpose was immediate and practical. Modern rest often lacks even that simplicity. The absence of small, meaningful structure leaves the nervous system without closure. It continues to monitor, evaluate, and prepare. This activity drains energy quietly. Understanding this helps explain why rest can feel heavier when days feel open-ended. Fatigue is not only physical, it reflects the cost of holding awareness without clear orientation. The body rests, but the system as a whole remains engaged. This insight shifts the question again. Fatigue during rest may be less about how much one rests, and more about what rest is resting from. Without something to pause from, rest loses its meaning. The remaining question is how this loss of purpose interacts with social connection, and why isolation or reduced social role can further intensify the feeling of tiredness even in calm, comfortable conditions. Human energy has always been shaped by social connection. In early human groups, being part of others was not optional. Survival depended on shared effort, shared vigilance, and shared rest. Even quiet moments were rarely alone. The presence of others provided signals that the environment was being monitored collectively. This allowed individuals to release some personal vigilance. Rest within a group carried meaning because responsibility was distributed. In modern later life, social roles often change. Daily contact may decrease, and long stretches of time may be spent alone. Comfort may increase, but shared vigilance declines. The body rests, but the nervous system does not receive the same signals of collective safety. Without those signals, readiness remains individual rather than shared. This subtle shift has an energetic cost. The body continues to monitor internally because there is no external confirmation that monitoring is unnecessary. For older adults, this experience can be particularly strong. Many have moved from lives filled with interaction to quieter routines. Rest becomes solitary. The body is calm, but the system feels unsupported. This does not mean loneliness in an emotional sense. It means the absence of shared orientation. The nervous system evolved to relax more fully when others were present. Alone, it remains partially engaged. Over hours of rest, this engagement consumes energy quietly. Fatigue emerges even in the absence of sadness or worry. The person feels tired without knowing why. In evolutionary terms, isolation required vigilance. An individual alone was more vulnerable. The body responded by staying alert. Modern solitude recreates this condition unintentionally. The environment is safe, but the ancient system does not recognize safety without social cues. Silence and privacy do not equal protection. As a result, rest remains incomplete. This effect can deepen when social purpose also fades. Without roles that connect one to others, awareness turns inward again. The body continues to prepare for interaction that does not occur. Energy is spent on readiness rather than recovery. This helps explain why fatigue can feel heavier in quiet, solitary rest than during brief social engagement. Interaction provides structure and shared attention. It signals that responsibility is not carried alone. Without it, the system holds tension quietly. Understanding this reframes fatigue in later life. It suggests that tiredness during rest is not only about the body or the mind, but about the social context in which rest occurs. Humans evolved to rest together, not alone. Modern rest often removes that context. The body responds by staying partially alert. This insight does not prescribe action. It simply clarifies another layer of the problem. Fatigue during rest reflects not only aging and physiology, but also the loss of shared signals that once allowed deeper release. The question that follows is how all these layers combine to shape the overall experience of being tired, even when resting, and whether this fatigue carries a message about how humans were meant to rest in the first place. Rest is often treated as a simple act, but in human history it was a complex state, shaped by many overlapping signals. The body did not decide to rest based on comfort alone. It rested when effort had ended, danger had passed, resources were nearby and others were present to share watchfulness. These conditions rarely appeared in isolation. They formed a pattern the body could recognize. In modern life, rest is often stripped of this pattern. Comfort remains, but effort, completion, and shared context may be missing. The body enters rest without the full set of signals it evolved to trust. As a result, rest becomes biologically ambiguous. The person stops moving, but the system does not fully shift into recovery. Instead, it hovers between states. This hovering feels like tiredness without relief. From the body's perspective, something is incomplete. It is waiting for confirmation that rest is justified. This confirmation does not come from softness or quiet. It comes from sequence. Effort followed by pause. Engagement followed by release. Responsibility followed by handover. When these sequences are absent, rest remains provisional. The body stays prepared. This preparation costs energy even in stillness. Over time, the cost accumulates. Fatigue becomes the background of rest itself. For older adults, this experience is common because many of the sequences that once structured life have ended. Work concludes permanently. Children grow independent. Social roles change. The body rests, but nothing clearly follows. There is no next phase to prepare for, yet the system continues to prepare anyway. This creates a subtle tension. The body is calm, but not resolved. Energy is conserved, but not restored. The person feels tired even though life is quieter. This is not because rest is wrong, but because rest has been removed from its original context. Evolution did not design rest as an isolated activity. It designed rest as part of a cycle. When the cycle breaks, rest loses clarity. The body does not know whether to recover or remain ready. It chooses readiness by default. Understanding this helps unify the layers explored so far. Fatigue during rest is not caused by one factor alone. It emerges from the interaction of ancient vigilance, energy conservation, awareness, memory, movement, stress history, aging physiology, time perception, purpose, and social context. Each layer adds a small demand. Together, they create a state where rest feels heavy. This does not mean something is wrong. It means the body is responding coherently to incomplete information. Rest without sequence is ambiguous. The body fills that ambiguity with readiness. The sensation of tiredness is the felt result. This perspective shifts the meaning of fatigue. It is not a failure of rest. It is a signal that the conditions for deep recovery have not been fully met. The question that follows is whether this fatigue is something to eliminate, or whether it carries a message about how humans might need to redefine rest in a world that no longer provides the cycles it evolved to rely on. Fatigue during rest is often treated as a problem to be fixed. Yet from a biological perspective, it may be a form of communication. The body is not expressing error, but uncertainty. It is signaling that something in the pattern of rest does not match what it evolved to understand. In earlier human life, fatigue usually followed effort. It meant energy had been spent and needed to be protected. Rest that followed felt justified. In modern later life, fatigue often appears without clear effort. This can feel confusing or discouraging, but the sensation itself still serves a purpose. It slows behavior, narrows attention, and reduces unnecessary action. Even when no immediate danger exists, the body continues to use fatigue as a regulating signal. It keeps the system conservative in the absence of clear resolution. This suggests that tiredness during rest is not meaningless. It reflects a body managing ambiguity. When rest lacks sequence, purpose, or shared context, the body does not know how much energy it can safely release. Fatigue steps in as a default brake. This brake prevents overextension in an uncertain environment. From the body's point of view, uncertainty has not disappeared. It has simply changed form. Instead of predators or scarcity, uncertainty now involves time, health, and the unknown future. The body responds to all uncertainty in a similar way. It conserves. This conservation is felt as tiredness. Especially later in life, when the future feels less predictable, the body may rely more heavily on this signal. Fatigue becomes a way of keeping the system within safe limits. It discourages unnecessary strain. In this sense, Fatigue during rest may be protective rather than pathological. It invites reduction, not productivity. Modern thinking often frames tiredness as something to overcome. Evolutionary thinking frames it as something to listen to. The body is not asking for more rest in quantity. It is indicating that the conditions for restoration are unclear. Without those conditions, it chooses caution. Understanding this changes how fatigue is interpreted. Instead of seeing tiredness as a failure of rest, it can be seen as feedback about context. The body is saying that rest, as currently structured, does not provide the signals it needs. This does not mean rest should be abandoned. It means rest alone is not enough. The body evolved to rest within cycles, relationships, and purpose. When those are missing, fatigue fills the gap. This perspective reduces the urge to fight tiredness. Fighting keeps the system active. Listening allows the signal to be acknowledged. Acknowledgement does not immediately remove fatigue, but it reduces resistance. The nervous system may stop working against itself. Over time, this can soften the experience. Fatigue remains, but it is less charged. It becomes information rather than a problem. This prepares the ground for a deeper question. If fatigue during rest is meaningful, then what is it asking for? Is it asking for more sleep, or is it pointing toward a different understanding of rest itself? The answer may lie not in changing the body, but in changing the relationship between rest, time, and meaning in the later stages of life. Fatigue, when it appears during rest, often challenges the way rest is understood. Many people assume rest should erase tiredness. When it does not, the sensation feels wrong. Yet throughout human history, rest was never meant to remove all fatigue. It was meant to manage it. Fatigue served as a boundary, reminding the body where its limits were. It shaped behavior, encouraged caution, and preserved energy for what mattered most. In later life, when demands soften and time opens, fatigue can appear more clearly because fewer external pressures are masking it. The body is no longer being carried forward by necessity. It has space to express its true state. This expression is not a malfunction. It is honesty. The body is revealing how much energy is available and how carefully it must be used. In modern thinking, this honesty is often uncomfortable. There is a tendency to expect comfort without cost, calm without residue, and rest without boundaries. Evolution did not operate under those expectations. The body evolved to communicate through sensation. Fatigue is one of its most consistent signals. When it appears during rest, it may be indicating that rest alone cannot resolve what has accumulated over time. Decades of vigilance, adaptation, responsibility, and restraint do not disappear when movement stops. They are carried forward in tissue, rhythm, and nervous system tone. Rest brings these layers to the surface. This can feel discouraging, but it also carries clarity. Fatigue during rest tells the truth about the body's history. It reflects not only aging, but endurance. The body has lasted. It has adapted long enough to reach a stage where survival is no longer the central task. Fatigue becomes more visible precisely because danger has receded. In earlier life, tiredness was often overridden by necessity. Later, necessity fades, and sensation speaks. This reframes fatigue as a signal of transition rather than decline. The body is shifting from a mode of constant response to a mode of sustained presence. That shift is not smooth. It involves friction. The body is learning how to exist without the structures it once relied on. Fatigue marks this learning process. It signals that old rules are no longer sufficient, but new ones have not fully formed. This is why fatigue during rest can feel ambiguous. It is not clearly asking for action nor clearly satisfied by stillness. It sits between states. Understanding this reduces the urge to force resolution. Fatigue does not need to be eliminated to be meaningful. It needs to be understood within the context of a life lived under different conditions. The body is not asking to return to the past. It is indicating that rest, as currently defined, is incomplete. Rest was once part of a shared rhythm of effort, purpose, and closure. When those rhythms change, rest must also change. Fatigue is the body's way of pointing to that mismatch. It invites a reconsideration of what rest is for. Rather than seeing rest as a tool to restore lost energy, It may be more accurate to see it as a space to recognize limits. In later life, rest may not refill reserves, it may stabilize them. Fatigue, then, is not an enemy. It is a boundary that protects what remains. Listening to it does not mean surrendering to decline. It means acknowledging the body's reality. This acknowledgement can reduce internal conflict. The body is no longer being asked to perform as it once did. It is allowed to be as it is. This does not remove fatigue, but it changes its meaning. Fatigue becomes part of the message of rest, rather than a failure of it. The final question that follows is not how to make fatigue disappear, but what kind of rest honors the body's long history and changing needs, and how humans might learn to rest not to recover what was lost, but to live well within what remains. Rest, when viewed across the full span of human life, is not a technique but a relationship. It reflects how the body understands safety, time, and its own limits. In earlier stages of life, rest often functions as recovery. Energy is restored because it has been clearly spent. The body expects to return to action. In later life, that expectation changes. Action no longer defines the future in the same way. The body is not preparing to resume constant effort. It is learning how to remain present within narrower margins. This shift alters the purpose of rest itself. Rest is no longer primarily about rebuilding strength. It becomes about maintaining balance. Fatigue during rest signals this transition. The body is not failing to recover. It is adjusting to a different mode of existence. Evolution did not design humans to feel endlessly refreshed. It designed them to adapt. In later life, adaptation means conserving, stabilizing, and protecting what remains. Rest supports this process by slowing the system, even if that slowing feels like tiredness. The sensation of fatigue becomes part of how the body keeps itself within safe limits. This can feel counterintuitive. Many people expect rest to remove tiredness. When it does not, they assume something is wrong. But fatigue may be serving a different function now. It discourages overreach. It invites gentler pacing. It signals that the body values continuity over intensity. From this perspective, fatigue during rest is not an obstacle, it is guidance. It points toward a way of living that is less about restoring youth and more about sustaining presence. In earlier life, rest prepared the body for what came next. In later life, rest supports being where one already is. The body no longer asks for readiness, it asks for allowance. This allowance includes acknowledging tiredness without trying to eliminate it. When fatigue is no longer treated as an enemy, the nervous system may reduce its internal resistance. Energy is no longer spent fighting sensation. The body can settle into its natural rhythm. This does not mean fatigue disappears. It means it becomes quieter. It stops demanding attention. Rest becomes less about producing a feeling and more about creating a condition. That condition is stability. The body is allowed to do its ongoing maintenance without being pushed to perform. Over time, this changes the experience of rest. It becomes less evaluative and more accepting. The mind stops measuring rest by how refreshed it feels. It begins to recognize rest by how steady the body becomes. This steadiness may be subtle, but it is meaningful. It reflects a body that has endured long enough to reach a stage where survival is no longer urgent. Fatigue marks that arrival. It says the body has done what it was shaped to do. Now it must be treated differently. The final question, then, is not whether fatigue can be removed from rest, but whether humans can learn to rest in a way that respects the body's history, limits, and quiet intelligence, without demanding from it what evolution never promised to give. In earlier stages of life, rest often carried an expectation of change. One rested in order to feel different afterward. Stronger, clearer, ready again. Over time, this expectation becomes less reliable. The body no longer responds with clear renewal. Instead, it offers steadiness. This difference is subtle, but important. Steadiness is not the absence of fatigue. It is the absence of collapse. The body maintains itself within limits rather than pushing beyond them. Rest supports this by reducing strain, even if it does not create a sensation of freshness. Fatigue during rest can therefore be understood as part of regulation, not failure. The body is signaling that it is operating close to its sustainable range. This signal encourages moderation. In evolutionary terms, such signaling protected older individuals who no longer needed to take risks for survival of the group. Conserving energy increased longevity. Fatigue acted as a quiet boundary. Modern life often interprets boundaries as problems. There is a tendency to seek solutions, improvements, or fixes. When fatigue appears during rest, the instinct is to correct it. Yet correction requires effort. Effort activates the same systems that fatigue is trying to restrain. The body responds with resistance. The cycle continues. Understanding fatigue as a boundary allows rest to change its role. Rest no longer needs to erase tiredness, it needs to prevent excess. This reframing reduces internal conflict. The body is no longer asked to perform beyond its design, it is allowed to regulate itself. For older adults, this shift can be significant. Many have spent a lifetime responding to expectations. When rest becomes another expectation, fatigue intensifies. When rest becomes permission, fatigue softens. The sensation may still be present, but it carries less weight. The nervous system no longer works against it. This does not mean resignation. It means alignment. The body is met where it is. Energy is used to support essential processes, rather than to chase a feeling that may no longer be available. Over time, this alignment can create a different experience of rest. Rest becomes less about how one feels and more about how one remains. Breathing steadies. The body settles into a predictable rhythm. Fatigue becomes background rather than foreground. It no longer demands attention. This is not because fatigue has disappeared, but because it has been integrated. Evolution favored bodies that could adapt their expectations as conditions changed. Later life is a changing condition. The body responds by narrowing its range and signaling limits. Rest that honors these signals supports continuity. Rest that resists them creates tension. Understanding this distinction clarifies the role of rest in the later stages of life. Rest is not a tool to restore the past. It is a way to sustain the present. Fatigue is part of that present. It marks the body's commitment to preservation rather than expansion. Accepting this does not diminish life. It alters its rhythm. The final movement of this exploration is not toward a solution, but toward a question. If fatigue during rest is a form of guidance, then what kind of rest allows the body to feel supported rather than corrected? And how might humans learn to rest not to regain what has been lost, but to remain whole within what is still here? Rest, in its deepest sense, was never meant to promise renewal without limit. It was meant to allow life to continue without breaking. When the body reaches later stages, this truth becomes clearer. The systems that once pushed forward now turn inward, not to retreat, but to preserve. Fatigue during rest is part of this preservation. It slows the body gently, reminding it to remain within what is sustainable. This is not a flaw. It is a form of wisdom written into biology. Evolution did not select for endless vitality. It selected for continuity long enough to matter. In later life, continuity becomes the primary goal. The body is no longer preparing for expansion. It is maintaining coherence. Fatigue signals where that coherence must be protected. When rest is understood this way, its meaning changes. Rest is no longer measured by how refreshed one feels afterward. It is measured by how evenly the body holds itself over time. Breathing becomes steadier, not necessarily deeper. Awareness becomes quieter, not necessarily absent. Energy is not replenished to excess, but distributed carefully. Fatigue may still be present, but it no longer dominates attention. It becomes a background condition rather than a problem to solve. This shift does not require effort. It requires a change in expectation. When rest is no longer asked to perform, the nervous system has less to resist. The body can settle into its natural rhythm, even if that rhythm includes tiredness. Over time, this reduces internal friction. Energy that was once spent judging or correcting sensation is freed, not to restore youth, but to support stability. This is where rest finds its final role. It becomes a space of allowance. The body is allowed to be exactly as it is, carrying its history without being asked to undo it. Fatigue becomes part of that history, not an interruption to it. This perspective offers something quiet but important. It removes the sense that something is wrong when rest feels heavy. It reframes heaviness as a sign that the body is conserving what remains. In a world that often values renewal above endurance, this can feel unfamiliar. But endurance has always been the deeper human achievement. The body that reaches later life has already succeeded at what evolution required. Fatigue marks that success. It says the body has learned when not to spend, when not to push, when to remain. Rest that honors this message becomes supportive rather than corrective. It does not promise transformation. It offers steadiness. This steadiness is subtle, but it carries value. It allows life to continue without strain. In this way, fatigue during rest is not an enemy of sleep or calm. It is a companion to them. It shapes a slower, more deliberate relationship with time and energy. The body no longer needs to be urged forward. It needs to be held. When rest is approached as holding rather than fixing, the experience changes. Fatigue remains, but it loses its sharpness. It becomes quieter, more predictable, less demanding. This is not because the body has more energy, but because it is no longer being asked to produce what it cannot. The final message of this long exploration is simple and grounded. Feeling tired while resting does not mean rest has failed. It means the body has entered a stage where rest serves a different purpose, not to restore what was lost, but to protect what remains. The question left open is not how to eliminate fatigue, but how to rest in a way that respects the body's long journey, its limits, and its quiet intelligence, without asking it to become something it was never designed to be.